Got several thoughts here. First one, on the Texas depository, it's my understanding they were storing their gold in another state, and that's the reason they built it, because they were concerned about other states holding their gold, and that's why it was originally built. Do you know if that's right?
Yeah, that's part of. They had somewhere in the Northeast, maybe New York or something. They had their gold.
Ooh, I can see I bet it's lots more likely they're going to see you go. The treasurer, you'll be able to audit the gold that's in there. So that's a huge safeguard, isn't it?
Well, absolutely, and it's necessary. I mean, we would have to have some way of identifying and assuring gold owners that they have what they think they have. So
Right.
That would be just a bare minimum requirement.
Right, exactly. Okay. And as you said earlier, I mean, and hopefully we'll get this bill out of committee and keep working on it. And if this was put in place in Louisiana, we could build our own. You're just looking at a startup cost of building one that's not feasible at this time. Is that correct?
That's correct. I mean, we want to have proof of model. We want to make sure that everybody's comfortable with this. We don't have to invest $20 million to build a depository to make this successful in Louisiana. But if it is, and you see fit as a legislature to create one, we can definitely do that. It would be a second step. We just want to have proof of model here that this actually will work and everybody will be comfortable with it.
And one thing that I'm sure to wind up in court cases, most of the controversial things we pass do. So not voting for the bill because of that
Right.
is kind of odd. But anyhow, I mean, being able to have currency and not pay capital gains when you buy and sell the gold on the transaction is what makes it impossible for a private industry to do. I mean, there are other industries, my understanding, or other groups that have this same thing, but that those capital gains have to be paid on their transactions. So it's important that we do this in the state of Louisiana so we have that possibility. And I feel like we won't have to pay capital gains. Do you agree?
Well, I can give you my opinion. I think that what is likely to happen, and again, this is just kind of a guess more than anything, is that day-to-day use and transactions probably will end up not being taxable. But, large holdings and large periods of holdings, they may well judge that should, because you may be acting much more like a commodity in that case. So this is all just, again, pioneer territory. It's a frontier. But again, there's a lot happening, the modernization of currency in this country. The one thing we're the most concerned about, of course, is central bank digital currency. As you've heard testified before, this is another direction of freedom for users and for citizens, and that's what we want, is freedom and safety, which this both provides.
So what you're saying is what I agree with. This is another option for the ordinary men and women, small business owners, to possibly protect their investments against inflation and have the protection of the state to protect them. They have a pretty big stick to fight back with instead of trying to do it individually.
Absolutely, and that this should be opaque to government. Government should not be, except to the extent that could be money laundering and that sort of thing, which is, of course, necessary. But with central bank digital currency, you've already heard testimony suggesting that government can control your expenditures, and that's not something that a government should get involved in. This would not go that direction at all. It would be totally independent. It would be a free use of currency and a safe use of currency.
And I would also agree with you that idea is mainstream, that they're going to punish the people that are doing things they don't see appropriate. I mean, and this is a chance. I mean, one other thing I will say. Do you know the only government entity that I've ever known in history in the United States to seize your gold? That federal government did it back in the Depression.
Yes,
I'm not mistaken. They made
right.
if I'm not mistaken, they bought it all for $35 an ounce and then turned around and raised the price to $70 an ounce. So I believe the feds are who we need to be worried about here.
Right, and let me add this. My parents used to tell me how they had to have coupons in order to buy things during World War II. There's all kind of good reasons to do those kind of things, but you know where they always end up. That is political control of the citizenry, just like we have in China today. So we've got to be very careful about all of these things, all these ideas. It's neat that we have the technology, but we've got to be careful that it's for the people and not against the people.
And as you're testifying, it's what I see it is just another arrow in the quiver of the regular small business owners and working class people to protect their dollars or protect their assets against inflation.
Completely.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question. What we discussed was what's different now between these other institutions and the cards are talking about is you have to pay capital gains on those any gains, or you have capital losses, depending on what it is. We had some questions here about gold not performing well. Do you know how much the dollar has lost in value since 1971?
Well, what I can tell you is that when I first came to this house in 1972, the gold was just a little over $35 an ounce, and today gold is just under $2,200 an ounce. Now, has gold really changed, or has the dollar changed? I was just buying a candy bar 2 days ago. It was like a 5-cent candy bar, and it was $3. I'm thinking, has candy really gone up like that, or is the value of our dollars going down? I think gold's really, in my opinion, very stable. It's the dollar, as we have deficits and create more money in the money supply, that it appears gold's going up. And this is one of the keys on the capital gains tax that I wanted to mention about somehow avoiding taxation. We're talking about paying taxes right now on things that are not real capital gains, because the gold is being denominated in more dollars, but it's not really worth any more. But yet you'd have to pay capital gains now on something that is not a real gain. It's an artificial gain. So this is a reason that this was a way to have people keep hold by having their money in gold, being able to access it, but not paying capital gains on what is not a real gain.
That's a good point, and that's a point I was wanting to make. So gold is seen as a store of value, is what it's seen. Over long term, gold has always been seen as a store of value.
Yes.
We're talking about investments and non-investments. Gold has never, anybody I've ever read, been anything but a store of value.
I read that a nice men's suit has always been about 1 ounce of gold.
Exactly. It's a store value. And so should you pay, the question is, my question is, should you pay taxes on when you don't have a gain, you just have a store value? And I think that's important that we change it to a currency so we offer that to the people. But my research shows that the dollars went down in value by 80% since 1971. 80%. Mm-hmm. The price of gold has increased by 51% since 1971. So I think that a lot of the arguments here are not looking at this as a currency, as a value there that we offer to ordinary citizens. So anyhow, that's all I had to say. Thank you.
Another thing I wanted to say, Representative McCormick, there were questions on the crypto bill about would you have to have the license. Glint, if they were chosen as the credit card provider, or any of them, would have to get the license under this legislation. And this is to make sure that we don't have money laundering and things like that. So this legislation is not part of the banking system, but it is part of the legal system, and it is part of the anti-money laundering system. So nobody's going to avoid any of that when they make a gold deposit, if it's at the Texas Bullion Depository or elsewhere that might be chosen by the treasurer.
You bet. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I know the answer to this question, but I want to ask the most obvious question. You are here to represent the bankers, isn't that correct?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
You're not here to represent the citizens of this state. I mean, that's not your job. That's not what you're being paid to do. Isn't that correct?
I'll answer that. I think the best way I can answer that, Representative, is the vast majority of our members are community banks.
Sure.
They've got community in their name. They're pivotal to their communities. They have been for decades. So when we get feedback that this is harmful to Louisiana communities, that's impactful to us.
And I understand that, but I want to make it clear I'm here to represent my constituents. And since we've been talking about this bill, we discussed it with constituents, and they're ecstatic about it. So, let's talk about how this could negatively affect the banks, because in reality, that's, whether it's, I did hear y'all say one thing, that the only thing we have to base this on is the U.S. Constitution. Wasn't that your testimony?
I think if it was said that way, that was inaccurate. It's based on a person's interpretation of the U.S. Constitution, which, as we've talked about today, has not been litigated, no IRS determinations.
Well, the IRS doesn't determine what the Constitution says. I would assume that would have to go through the court system. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, but I guess from the perspective of whether it's taxable, I don't know exactly the IRS's role, but yeah, I would think that it will go through the court system based on this person's interpretation of the law.
And let me ask you another question. We talked about lots, gold can go up and go down, but it's pretty much a guarantee if somebody's got U.S. dollars in your bank, it will go down in value over a period of time. Isn't that, historically speaking, that's happened? I don't know, there may be a year somewhere in the past that it didn't, but historically speaking, the buyer and power of that dollar will decrease. Is that not correct?
Well, I don't know if I'm the right person to answer that. I mean, I would say that are you saying that gold could not go down as well?
No, I'm just talking about the dollar. I'm not talking about gold now.
I can jump in and say, look, that's a function of our economy and where we are. Are we in an inflationary economy or recessionary economy? Where you could see prices go down as we contract, and that's happened over our history. So,
Are you saying since 1971 we've had deflation? Is that what you're saying?
I know we've had recessions.
Right.
And I know we've had prices on certain items go down in value cyclically.
I'm
not here to testify as an economist for certain. So.
Sure, you bet. I guess my concern is the only real threat I see this to the banking system, but everything else you said, I appreciate it, but the only real threat I see this to the banking system, and a concern that y'all should have, is it would be such a great opportunity for citizens. They may take dollars out of the bank and turn them into gold. I don't see any other legitimate threat besides that. Do y'all see any other legitimate threat besides that?
Well, again, Representative, we're not against people that want to invest in gold. They have that ability today if they want to hedge against inflation.
But they don't have that ability to possibly avoid capital gains, though.
It's the possibly part that's problematic, and then the way to.
But in reality, that's not the banker's problem, though. That's the investor's problem. That doesn't have anything to do with the Bankers Association, though, does it?
It does if that means that it's creating a state-sponsored banking entity, and if it also means that by promoting this based on something that may not materialize, that means more money leaving our state.
Yeah, and I can appreciate you saying that. But do you feel like you're in competition with the federal government because they have the ability to create currency? So you feel like they're in the banking business too?
Well, they can create currency, and the government heavily regulates banking. So I'll leave it at that. I don't know that I'd say they're in the banking business, but they heavily regulate the banking system.
Are y'all regulated by the Federal Reserve?
Bank holding companies are regulated by the Federal Reserve, and then there are some banks, the actual bank itself, that have the Fed, but there's also the FDIC as a federal regulator of most banks, and also another entity called the OCC for national banks.
In the Federal Reserve a private bank itself?
I don't know that. I don't know the answer to that.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Is the Federal Reserve a private bank itself?
I think there's legislation that was passed to establish the Federal Reserve. So I think it's got some aspects of it that are tied to the federal government.
It's a private bank. Yes. Thank you. Appreciate you, Mr. Chairman.